Good evening, everyone. Today is February 22nd, 2018, and in this video I am going to show you how to use analytics to answer your own questions about your blockchain transactions. So real quick, this video is significantly different from the kinds of videos I usually publish. A lot of my videos have to do primarily around like setting up your wallets, managing your wallets, sending and receiving funds. But in this video, I'm going to be focusing in on how do you analyze a particular transaction. So for example, let's say that you send some Ether to your friend and you want to know what the current status of that transaction is. I'm going to show you how you can track that transaction down, okay? So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Real quick, before we go into actually walking you through how to read a particular transaction record, let's go over basically how a block is structured. So basically, let's just look at this green one, okay? And blockchains is literally a chain of blocks, right? And a block is basically it contains a bunch of transactions. So when you send some crypto to a friend, that transaction gets put up in a block, which then gets validated by a bunch of validators or miners or whatever they might be, and then they commit that block of transactions to the blockchain, okay? And so each block contains transactions, which is way down here. So you don't have to worry about this block piece or header. You just have to worry about this transactions piece. And then from there, you can look at any transaction by the address, the to address, the from address. So who can be based on who's sending and who's receiving. You can also look it up by the transaction ID and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through a transaction record that I did when I participated in an ICO several months ago. So the example I'll be using is I participated in an ICO for a token, and I sent my contribution in Ether, and I sent that Ether from my Ether wallet. So in my Ether wallet, when you send a transaction, it will always give you a link to your transaction. Okay, and this is that link that I was provided by my Ether wallet after sending my ICO contribution. And so it brings you to a page, and it has my transaction already jotted down here, and it says transaction found, which is good because usually right after you send something out, it'll say transaction pending. But if you want, you could keep refreshing this particular page for your transaction, and it will basically update once it's been committed to a blockchain. Okay. And you scroll down, and there's these various parts that you can read about your transaction. So like I mentioned, there's a transaction ID, which they call the TX hash. Then there's the address that you sent it from. So this is actually one of my Ether addresses. And then the address you sent it to, and then the amount of Ether you sent, or whatever token you decide to send. The nonce, I won't go into too much detail, but basically a nonce is the number it counts the number of transactions sent from an address, and the reason it does is to prevent basically fraudulent or double spending. And I'm not going to go into detail about that. It's kind of really like in the weeds, so I recommend just if you have any questions about that, comment it into the comment section of this video. But then there's like the gas limit, which is essentially the most amount of gas you're willing to spend, and then the amount of money, or gwei, which is basically Ether, you're willing to set your gas price at. So if you don't know much about gas, the way it works is when the resources, let's say in the Ethereum blockchain, are clogged up, you have to basically, if you want to get your transaction processed fast and first, you have to pay your way to get in. So you dictate that through your gas limit and gas price. So from here, you can click on any one of these areas and you can look at the data for your transaction in a different way. So if I click through on the transaction hash, it's gonna send me to this really detailed log that shows me in further detail, the transaction ID, which we already saw, whether the transaction was successful or not. It tells you which or where in the blockchain it was processed. It tells you when it was processed, so about sometime in November. And once again, it says which address, and it says what address you sent it to, and it'll tell you, since it was for an ICO, I sent it to a contract address, and it basically shows you here's the contract address, and here are all the conditions that executed as a result of that contract being fulfilled. It shows you the value. So 0.2 Ether right now, it says worth about $160, but I think back in November it wasn't. And then kind of once again breaks down your gas limit, gas price, and even gives you your gas cost in dollars. So this tells me I paid almost $2 in gas based on today's Ether price. And then just some other, I'd say, less important variables. And so from here, you can go back. So I'm going to toggle to my last screen, and you can also go to the from address, and you go on here, and this will basically give you all the stats about the from address, balance of everything currently has, the value in Ether, all the different tokens that address has, every single transaction that address has ever been associated with sending or receiving. And if you go back, it's pretty much if I go back here, if I want to go to the to address, it's pretty much the same deal. I can see this person or this entity, I can see every single transaction that ever went to and from this particular address. So the site that I use for Ethereum transactions is etherscan.io. But overall, you can search by address, transaction hash, block, token. I mean, there's just so many ways you can analyze and do kind of a deep dive into a particular transaction if you need answers to your own questions. And it's pretty cool because this is exactly what makes a public and open ledger so great. It's anybody can see it. It's obviously there is anonymity behind the address, but I'd say this is basically good for the kinds of use cases where you sent crypto to a friend and now you're freaking out because you haven't the crypto has left your wallet, but let's say maybe your friend says they haven't received it yet. Well, you can always come to something like this website and actually see if the transaction is successful or not, and it'll tell you was it successful, yes or no, and then it'll tell you what address it went to, and that way you can actually provide evidence that actually sent the funds and it went through. So that's just one of many ways you can use this tool. I recommend it's one of those things where the more you explore it, the more sense it's going to make. And if you have any questions about how basically these blockchain explorers work, which is what I would call something like this, go ahead and comment it in the video. Otherwise, feel free to subscribe and have a good evening. Thanks. Bye.